More than 101 bills passed the Illinois House yesterday. These are House bills advancing out of committees, advancing out of the House floor, and now they can be sent to the Illinois Senate for final passage before they go on to the governor's desk. Will all of these bills follow that line, or are some of these just big priority bills that maybe are going to be sending messages heading into elections and so on? That's obviously something that has to be taken into consideration as well. But more than 100 bills passed the Illinois House yesterday, and we'll be looking at just some of them. But it's amazing to see how much they put into a single day's work after being off for months, right? And then they come in and they line stuff up and they pass bill after bill after bill after bill after bill. So we'll review some of those. And full disclosure, I have not been able to listen to every little bit of this debate in the House as they passed more than 100 bills in just one session day. That's on top of the 40-plus bills they passed on Tuesday. How many bills are they going to pass today? Who knows? What about Friday as well? Keep in mind, the Illinois legislature, both the House and Senate, has filed more than 6,500 bills, I believe. Now, the Senate hasn't really done much floor action. They've still been in committees moving stuff around, so I imagine that they're going to line up and start knocking stuff out of the Senate here in short order. But the Senate didn't pass any bills on Tuesday. They didn't pass any bills on Wednesday. The House has been busy, busy, busy. One bill that they did pass deals with fentanyl testing strips. And this legislation would allow for pharmacists to sell fentanyl testing strips over the counter. And the measure would also allow for county health departments to distribute test strips at their facilities at no cost to the recipient. And the bill's sponsors say that this is an effort to help combat the fentanyl overdose situation, which is pretty remarkable, having increased with opioid overdoses from 2013 to 2020, an increase by over 2,000%. So good bipartisan legislation there moving forward, but there was all kinds of other legislation that, got some pretty heated debate and some disparaging comments back and forth as they discussed one bill in particular, and this dealt with the issue of libraries and books and controversial content in some of these books and parents wanting to sound off about not wanting their kids exposed to certain things. Well, that led again to some pretty heated debate on the House floor yesterday as the sponsor of the legislation to limit federal tax dollars that are passed through the Illinois Secretary of State's office to local libraries from going to local libraries that, quote, banned books. Here is State Representative Ann Stava Murray. You'll also hear Republican State Representative Martin McLaughlin and State Representative C.D. Davidsmeyer from yesterday's floor debate on a bill to prohibit the use of federal tax dollars for libraries that, quote, ban books.
This bill protects libraries from external attempts to ban certain books and would make libraries and library systems which fail to disallow the banning of specific books ineligible for state grants starting in 2024. Just last year in my district, that discussion was spurred on by a few radical parents and the Proud Boys hate group over a book called Genderqueer. All too often, we see the books targeted by these hate groups and radical fringe parents are books having to deal with LGBTQIA plus identities or Black and brown authors.
There's time and space. I love that. We're in the middle of an election season for library board, which is, I think, April 4th this year. The electorate has had months of time and plenty of space to make a determination how they want their library boards to move forward for their local communities. I find this a complete assault on local control and on parents, again, whether progressives or conservatives, libertarian, Green Party, moderates, or whatever other characterization you'll make. These people volunteer as nonpartisan elected local officials. And for the state to tell a local library board, listen to the professionals, follow the professionals, I don't understand why we have local elections anymore if a bill like this passes.
Everything should be out there for whoever wants to choose whatever they want to choose. But I don't think Every Tuesday my kid goes to the library, and neither myself nor my wife are there to make a decision as the parent on what my kid gets to pick up out of the library.
Could you ask it that they not be taken to the library? If you're that concerned?
I don't think they should be completely kept from the library because there may be one or two books. I think they should be able to go to the library like every other kid.
And you're not confident that your parenting has instilled in your children their own ability to choose their own books?
I know for a fact that my parenting will allow my children to pick the right book.
In terms of the argument about local control, I find that disgusting. Local control has long been a dog whistle for allowing statewide or nationwide racist or bigoted policies to persist. And by saying local control, you're booing, and only one side is booing. I wonder why. Because maybe there's some truth to it.
So some disparaging comments, some aspersions cast by the Democrat sponsor of the bill that is advocated by the Secretary of State's office as the state librarian to ensure that people have access to books in public libraries and school libraries as well. And you got to think, is this an effort to send a certain message before library board elections, or is this a way to really shore up the ability for people to access all kinds of information? And we talked about this before. Is this going to be for everything? Is it going to be including, making sure that a kid can access Ayn Rand books, Atlas Shrugged, at a Chicago area library extension office? Or what about Defense Distributed's 3D schematics for you to be able to download and access schematics to be able to print a 3D printed gun, for instance? That's a very much a First Amendment argument as well, that these types of schematics should be available to everybody. So you can see where this really does cut both ways, but that bill passed mostly along party lines, and you'll see how the Senate takes that up moving forward. Coming back, though, we've got other stuff to tackle from yesterday's House debate, including a measure that deals with schools and police, a measure that deals with schools and workforce, and also a measure that deals with employers who have employees striking and how those employers could possibly be criminally charged if they conduct themselves a certain way. So stay tuned. We'll get to that coming up next here on WMAY, a review of the more than 100 bills passed yesterday out of the Illinois House. It's right here on Springfield's Morning. Been talking about the more than 100 bills that passed the Illinois House yesterday, and it's been a high-flying week so far with legislation flying out of that chamber. And we heard a little bit of the bill that would ultimately prohibit some federal tax dollars from going to local libraries if local libraries don't follow the American Library Association's standards when it comes to the rights that people have to access certain books. So we'll see how far that gets in the Illinois General Assembly, as the measure could be sent to the Illinois Senate. But there was other stuff that they brought up yesterday, including stuff impacting schools. You had State Representative LaShawn Ford. He had a bill that would ultimately address how people are treated in public schools by police, and can police be used to issue violations to students if they're not following the rules. Joe Larimer, he's with Debt Free Justice Coalition. He says that a lot of schools are still using police to issue citations if students aren't cooperating with school officials. And sometimes those citations can actually be up to around $450 per incident.
Upon receiving tickets, students are required to attend a municipal hearing that does not guarantee the student any right to counsel and does not offer any expungement process, effectively stripping the youth and families of their right to due process and leaving a lingering impact upon the student.
Now, Representative Ford, he said that schools should be able to handle kids when they act up inside their classrooms.
It has been identified as disorderly conduct in the school where you have children being children. And now we're labeling it disorderly conduct because the police are involved.
Now, State Representative Katie Stewart's a educator herself. She worried about the inability for police to possibly interact in certain ways where it's necessary for them to interact.
I just worry that this is going to hamstring principals with real discipline problems in their schools.
But Ford said that the measure will not impede police to actually hold students accountable if they commit a crime. So that's one measure that passed at advanced out of the committee at the Illinois House. And another set of measures that the Illinois Manufacturers Association is looking to advance deal with creating a pipeline of sorts for the manufacturers to encourage students to get more involved in certain trades, including manufacturing. And this was brought up, of course, yesterday during a news conference where Illinois Manufacturers Association had a whole bunch of different bills that they were talking about concerning work training and getting young kids involved. And in particular, State Representative Amy Ellick, she has a bill that would allow for, setting up people to have childcare at manufacturing facilities. Here's Amy Ellick.
Proud to partner with Illinois Manufacturing Association today on these important workforce issues. We must explore ways to build career pathways for students and remove barriers that make it difficult to enter the workforce.
House Bill 3308 would allow for children to kind of get the daycare they need at their parents' place of work.
House Bill 3308 assists employers and their employees by creating a pilot program to allow manufacturers to open on-site child care centers at no cost to their employees.
There's also legislation from Democrat State Representative Katie Stewart that would allow for technical training to take place of 2 years of foreign language. Here's Katie Stewart talking about her bill to do that.
By requiring the 2 years of foreign language for students, because it's going to take away the opportunities to get involved in some of those career technical education courses, those hands-on courses.
So a lot of legislation there. Another piece of legislation that did advance out of a committee yesterday dealing with a work pipeline to help give more workers, trained workers, skilled workers for the manufacturing space. Deals with allowing for some kind of conversation of liability protection and how can you provide insurance for businesses that want to encourage kids to get involved. That way they can have a career right out of high school instead of going into student loan debt. But there's some liability questions there, right? So if a student who's a junior or a senior, he wants to go and learn the ropes at a manufacturer in his community, what kind of liabilities there, who's going to be paying for that. So a measure did advance out of committee yesterday that would allow for a task force to come up with ideas on how to make that a reality. So, from education to workforce training to what happens when you get on the job and there's a union there that wants to strike and the boss is like, yo, you guys need to get back into work. If that boss crosses the line, what kind of penalties are there? Well, that was brought up on the House floor with a measure that passed, and we'll get to that coming up next here on WMAY as we continue to talk about hundreds of bills that are at the Illinois State House, moving all over the place, and bring you the latest here with a special Thursday State House Roundup with Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's News. Been talking about the 101 bills that passed the Illinois House yesterday, even more, advancing out of committees and a whole host of activity. A few comments on YouTube to the bill that ultimately would, if it passed the Senate after it passed the House, would prohibit federal tax dollars from going to public libraries who ban books. Again, just some of that debate from yesterday. Here's State Representative Martin McLaughlin talking about the importance of local control.
And for the state to tell a local library board, listen to the professionals, follow the professionals. I don't understand why we have local elections anymore if a bill like this passes.
Then the sponsor, Democratic State Representative Ann Stava Murray, disparaging opponents using local control.
Local control has long been a dog whistle for allowing statewide or nationwide racist or bigoted policies to persist. And by saying local control, you're booing and only one side is booing. I wonder why. Because maybe there's some truth to it.
I think others may say that local control is important because that allows for people not to get railroaded or ran over by globalists who are advancing certain agendas to tear apart communities and families and so on. But that's surely what some other people might have to say. But when it comes to the idea of banning books, there's a conversation on YouTube about Dr. Seuss. There's conversations about the Anarchist Cookbook. Is that going to be allowed? What about Alex Jones books? What about books that are written by who is that? The Kennedy? Is it Robert Kennedy who wrote the book about Anthony Fauci? Is that book going to be put up front and center right next to genderqueer? I think we should probably have access to all information, right? So, it's interesting to hear some of the criticisms of all of this as we advance forward with more legislation under review. But you got the book issue, you've got students and policing and how police can possibly interact with students at schools. That came up in a House committee yesterday. You have ideas to advance the worker training. That also came up yesterday in committee, including a bill that would allow for liability protection. But here's something that came up on the House floor when it comes to the workplace. And they did advance a couple of pieces of legislation that deal with prevailing wage. But this was a debate that happened concerning protests and work stoppages outside of employers where you've got the union, whatever the union may be, conducting a strike of sorts. So I want to get to that here in a moment, but we'll, of course, take your phone calls as they come in at 217-629-7970. That's the phone number. And let's go ahead and get to the phone calls. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Greg, being the lone left-leaning gentleman in my group of conservative friends, it's getting hard to defend, man. This lady here, hey, you don't agree with me? Well, that's simple. It's because you're racist or a bigot. Wow. She said that on public record. That's fantastic. Good for her.
Yeah, and said that in reference to the idea of local control, which, I mean, that's why we have local control, is so that people locally are making the decisions, and it's not, by fiat of some executive or some sole figure at the top of a power structure. I'll take another call. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning. The prevailing wage topic is interesting to me. I work on projects every once in a while that require prevailing wage, and really it's just a label. You are still hiring guys that are skilled enough to do the work, but they have to be paid a prevailing wage dollar amount, which in general is bankrupting all state agencies because the work could be done for half the price.
Well, not just state agencies, but also local municipalities. And that was some of the conversation that came up. And these get pretty complex. These pieces of legislation do get pretty complex. I don't know all the ins and outs, but there was some conversation about how this stuff is going to ultimately be costing taxpayers down the line.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's the same work that these people do on a daily basis for like $20 an hour. The state requires you to pay somebody $50 an hour to do it. And so, but it's the same work. And so they're protecting unions, they're protecting laborers unions. And it all goes back to the state government protecting teachers unions, all these contractor unions. Unions are bankrupting the state.
Well, I appreciate the call, and we want to hear from all voices, obviously, but I do want to get to this debate talking about unions in particular and protecting them from employers in this bill that brought up the issue of striking and how employers might be held responsible to a degree. Here is a bit of the House floor debate on one particular bill.
House Bill 3396, a bill for an act concerning employment. Third reading of this House bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. HB 3396 makes it a Class A misdemeanor to interfere with, obstruct, or impede a picket, demonstration, or other protest by placing any objects in the public right-of-way. I ask for a favorable vote.
On this question, Representative Ugasti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Indicates a yield.
Representative Yudnak, the bill actually indicates that a person who interferes or has the intent of interfering, obstructing, or impeding with a picket or a demonstration commits a Class A misdemeanor. The way it's drafted, wouldn't that include just going out and talking to a person, trying to convince them that they shouldn't be on the picket line?
No, I don't believe so. That might be part of other part of labor law, but this is really obstructing by placing objects, filling up the right-of-way where we have the legal right to stand when we're protesting, trying to push us off that public right-of-way.
Well, that may be the intent, but that's not, I think, the way it reads, because it just says anyone who with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the picket would commit a Class A misdemeanor. And I think that's a big problem, because I think that people should have a right to at least go out and talk and try and convince people, whether the group likes it or not, whether someone individual should be picketing. If an owner wants to go out and say something, or there's some other type of conversation to have. And instead, we're going to make this a crime now, that a person can't even go out and say things to their employees. So to the bill, I understand what he's saying as far as wanting to be able to picket and as well as exercise their rights as union members, but I believe this goes a bit far and is creating a criminal penalty where none is needed. And I think we need to rethink how we're wording these bills, how much is what the actual intent may be, and what we're actually doing under the bills. I urge a no vote.
That was State Representative Dan Ugasti who brought this up, and you had State Representative Patrick Windhorst ask the question about, is this a penalty enhancement? And the Democratic sponsor says, yes, it's a penalty enhancement. We may have to revisit this later next hour. We're just plumb out of time here on WMAY, and I got to take a break.